In 1932, Australia sent soldiers with machine guns into wheat country to fight emus, and the birds became the legend. It sounds like a joke written after the fact, but the story began with a very real problem in Western Australia. After the First World War, some former soldiers were encouraged to settle on farms inland in places where the land could be harsh and the margins were thin. By the early 1930s, the Great Depression had made everything worse. Wheat prices were low. Farmers were under pressure. And then came the emus. Emus are not small birds. They are tall, fast, and built for covering distance after breeding season. Large numbers moved through the wheat growing districts, searching for food and water. To farmers already struggling, they were not a curiosity. They were a threat to fences, fields, and the season's crop. The numbers are usually described as being in the thousands, with some contemporary accounts referring to around 20,000 birds in the affected area. The exact figure is difficult to treat as a clean count because emus were moving across open country. But the scale was large enough for farmers to demand action. This is where the story turns strange. The farmers appealed to the government. They wanted military help, or at least access to military firepower. The request reached officials at a time when the country was already tense over money, food, and promises made to ex-servicemen. The Minister for Defence, Sir George Pearce, approved a limited military response. So, in late 1932, a small army detachment was sent into the wheat belt under Major G.P.W. Meredith. Their equipment included Lewis guns, light machine guns, originally designed for war, not bird control. The plan sounded simple. From a desk, locate the emus, fire on them, protect the farms. But history often becomes strange when a simple plan meets a living landscape. The emus did not stand in neat lines. They did not move like an enemy army. They scattered, split, ran regrouped, and vanished into scrub and open country. The men sent to defeat them quickly discovered that a battlefield weapon was a clumsy answer to a moving ecological problem. And what began as pest control was about to become one of the most oddly remembered campaigns in Australian history. The strangest part of the Emu War is not that soldiers fired at birds. It is how badly the plan matched the problem. When Major Meredith and his small detachment arrived in Western Australia's wheat country, they were not facing an enemy with a camp, a command post, or a front line. They were facing emus spread across farmland and open scrub. The first attempt showed the weakness of the whole idea. A group of emus could appear like a perfect target, then break apart before the gun crew could do much. The birds were fast. They could run at high speed across rough ground. They did not need to understand tactics to defeat a tactic. They only had to keep moving. The Lewis gun was not useless, but it was not magic. It had to be positioned. It had to be supplied. It could jam. It was designed for human warfare where targets might be pinned, defended, or concentrated. In the wheat belt, the target was a shifting flock of large birds that could absorb chaos and disappear into space. At one point, the men tried mounting a gun on a vehicle. This also sounded practical. If the emus moved quickly, then the gun should move too, but rough country made accurate firing extremely difficult. A bouncing vehicle was not a stable weapons platform. The chase looked more dramatic than effective reports. From the time and later retellings differ in detail, and the story has often been polished into comedy. But the surviving outline is clear enough. The military effort did kill some emus. It did not solve the farmers' problem. The birds remained scattered across too large an area, too mobile for the method chosen against them. There was also a public relations problem. Newspapers noticed. The image was irresistible. A modern government, a military detachment, machine guns, and birds that somehow seemed to be winning. by refusing to behave like an army. The campaign became easy to mock because it inverted expectations. Humans had the technology, the emus had the terrain, and in that strange mismatch the legend grew. Not because the birds held a victory parade, not because there was a real war in the ordinary sense, but because a serious government response had been made to look absurd by the simplest force imaginable, animals doing what animals do. The operation continued, but the ending would turn the whole affair into a historical punchline. Australia did not literally surrender to emus, but by the end of 1932 the birds had won something more durable than a battle. They won the story. The military operation was eventually called off. Contemporary figures suggest hundreds of emus were killed, and later summaries often cite an official total under 1,000. But even if the exact numbers vary between accounts, the larger outcome is not really disputed. The campaign did not remove the problem. For the farmers, the situation remained practical, not funny. Emus still damaged crops and fences. Rural people still needed protection for their livelihoods. But the idea of solving the issue with soldiers and machine guns had proved awkward, expensive, and publicly embarrassing. The more effective answers were less cinematic. Better fencing bounties, local control, long-term management, rather than a military-style strike. That is why the so-called Emu War remains memorable. It is not just an animal story, it is a story about institutions reaching for the tool they understand even when the problem belongs to a different world. A machine gun can be powerful and still be the wrong answer. The emus did not need strategy meetings. They had speed numbers and open country. They turned the landscape itself into protection. And because they were birds, not soldiers, every official phrase around the campaign seemed slightly ridiculous the moment it was spoken. This is also why the phrase "Australia lost a war to emus" survives. It is exaggerated, but it points to a real historical failure. A state-backed attempt to use military force against a pest problem remembered, because the results fell so far short of the confidence behind the plan. The legend should not erase the hardship behind it. The farmers were under genuine pressure. The government was responding to real demands. The emus were not villains. They were part of the environment, moving through a changing agricultural frontier. But that is what makes the episode so strange. Nobody had to invent the absurdity. It was already there, sitting in the gap between human planning and the natural world. In the end, the emus did not defeat Australia. They defeated a bad idea. And that is why, nearly a century later, this small campaign still feels like history. Whispering a warning before you declare war on a problem. Make sure it can actually be fought, like one